All right, if we already discussed if there isn't metal in it, metal is used to make it, whether it's food or jewelry has metal in it, but you name it, all plastic parts. The metal mold was made by a metal worker or a tool maker to make plastic parts for injection molding. So metal is super important in our society. We use it in every single industry. These tools are 6,000 years old. We've actually found metal tools that are over 10, even closer to 20,000 years old that we've been using metal for that long. Again, here is a titanium hip. This part's titanium. It's hypoallergenic, meaning your body does not react to it. So this can be literally inserted into your bone. This is stainless steel, which avoids corrosion and is a smooth, hard surface that will last a lot longer. So it's two different elements, that are put together here. I say element titanium. Stainless steel is a combination of different elements. How many different types of metal exist? Let's name some. Just go. Shout it out. I just named two. Titanium, stainless steel. Copper. Tungsten. Aluminum. Iron. Tin. Idea started is silver. Somebody follow up with silver. Silver. Gold. Cuber. Platinum. Zinc. Nickel. Copper. You said copper. Brass. Bronze. What are we up to? Like less than 20. But in reality,
uranium.
Here's a periodic table. Anybody have chemistry? Anybody have chemistry?
Or even ESS, you get the little thing for that in ESS.
A little bit about that in ESS, yeah. Amazing. This is everything we know in the universe. Like we look at stars and we have technology that we can look at the stars and see their light pattern. Not ironically, but it's the same way we look at metal and see what contents are in the metal also, but it's a light pattern. So the light signature can tell us what elements are in the universe. And we have all these elements, and there's a few that we suspect exist, but we haven't found them yet. But we think of this as a pantry, right? If you think of a pantry where you walk in and you have baking soda and you have flour and you have sugar and you have brown sugar and you have salt and all the spices, this is everything we know that together makes the universe. There's nothing that does not exist that exists that is not on this chart. Okay? Incredible. In this chart, there are 88 metals, and those are called elements. They're all elements. Gold, iron, aluminum, titanium. They're all on the periodic table. But we can mix different metals together. And when we mix those together, just like we mix flour and baking soda and sugar to get cookies, we get thousands and thousands of different types of metals. In fact, today there are engineers or metallurgists that are just designing metals for certain applications. So some things will have a need that has to be super wear resistant, has to withstand heat, has to be flexible, operate under these conditions, and engineers, metallurgists will be designing those metals today. It's very high level science, but it is happening, okay? So thousands. So a pure metal is an element. That is actually on the periodic table, an element, okay? An alloy is where you mix those two metals together. Sometimes it's two metals, sometimes it's tens or dozens or maybe even 100 metals together to get a certain recipe. Okay? Periodic table. We'll come back to that. What jobs deal with metal? welders, construction workers, manufacturing, machinists. Well, we said welder first. Yep, there's lots of great jobs in welding. You will get a couple of weeks, maybe almost 2.5 weeks worth of welding in this class. We'll discuss how we go about that. HVAC, does anybody know what that stands for? HVAC. The AC is air conditioning, right? Heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. So that is a lot of sheet metal work. And if you look up here, all that silver, that was just replaced a couple years ago. It used to be painted and it was square, and they tore out from here all the way to the PD department, all this, the old stuff, and put in the new. And it was multi-million-dollar project to do this. So there were workers, sheet metal workers that were here in the building a couple summers ago and did all this ductwork. And that's a job. That's a sheet metal job. Manufacturing is when you make multiple of the same thing. That's summed up. That's the easiest way to put it. If we're constructing a house, it may be a unique house, or we're fabricating some stair railing or something, that's fabricating. But manufacturing, we're trying to make dozens or hundreds or thousands or millions of the same parts over and over. That's why cars have the same body style. It blows me away when maybe you know cars, you know, maybe you don't, but I look at 1956, 1955, 56, 57, and really it was 50. Before that until late 60s, that every single year the car bodies changed. They had to do all this tooling and all this work. The difference between a 55, a 56, and a 57 Chevy is very noticeable. And every year they change the car. Today we keep the same body style in the car for sometimes 10 years, and then they make a change, and it's a big deal. But back then, and lots of work required. They had to plan years ahead what that next car was going to look like, and change their tooling to make that happen. Today we are a little cheaper about that. Okay. Machinist, you will do machining in here. You're going to be turning a ring. You're going to be doing some CNC, some manual mill work, where you understand that we cut through metal with other tools. And I'm going to describe some of those tools today too. And we cut through metal. Foundry, I mentioned a little yesterday. I'll demonstrate the foundry in here, but you won't actually get to pour. And that's where we melt a metal. Here we melt aluminum because it melts at about 900 degrees Fahrenheit. But things like this, which I'll talk about, were cast out of iron or steel, which melts closer to 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit. It's a lot harder, more heat resistant. And I mentioned this yesterday as well. Surgeons, they deal with metal. They put metal screws in people, orthopedic surgeons. I have a little bit of titanium in my shoulders, both shoulders. Doesn't make me Iron Man or anything, but it's there because the surgeon went in using metal and tied my shoulders back together. And I've blown them out in my active lifestyle. Okay, here is the sheet that you have. We're going to start with that. So there's going to be a quiz, right? It's really one of the only quizzes in this class, and it's what we're going to cover the next half an hour or so. And it's everything on that sheet. So you'll be able to use this sheet. I'm going to give you every answer. Okay? So fill out this sheet the best you can. Okay? Anybody know what this is? FE. Speak up. I like to just yell out what you know. Iron. Fe means that is iron. Look at that. Perfect. Fe is for ferrous. Anything that contains iron is ferrous. Not this guy. It's kind of getting out of date. Anybody see this movie? Pretty good movie. If you like movies. Metals which can contain iron are ferrous. Okay, so on that sheet, if we look, there's categories. Is it ferrous or non-ferrous? Is it an element or an alloy? What are its properties? What are its methods to identify? Sometimes the properties and the methods to identify overlap a little bit. Okay? But we're going to be looking at steel, and the side with your name on it. The top, the very first one is white cast iron. We're going to look at that in a second. The second one is gray iron, wrought iron, steel. All steels contain iron, so the top 7 are all ferrous. All of those are ferrous. They're all iron or steel, and that's what we're going to look at first. Here we go. White cast iron has a white grain when it's broken and can be very hard. The place I worked in the metal foundry, we made pumps. We made a lot of things, but pumps were the primary driver in that foundry. And some of the pumps we made were really big. Right? And what they did, a lot of them were in the mining application. Okay, so these pumps, after you mine, you're using a lot of water, and you're creating this mud. It's called a slurry. Okay? And the slurry is like a thick mud. It has chunks of rock in it. Some of our pumps that we made could pump 4-inch diameter rocks. So like a softball, okay? That big, through this machine. So there were surfaces inside this machine that were just getting pummeled. Not only is the slurry super abrasive, but with 4-inch diameter rocks. Okay? So those surfaces would wear out really fast. And our metallurgist at the foundry came up with that we could make some of these plates with white cast iron. And they were extremely hard. Now you could drop one of these parts and it would literally crack or break, or hit it with a hammer and it would break. But because it was a wear surface, they would last a lot longer. So hardness and strength, or hardness and toughness, are different properties. Okay? So white cast iron can be very hard. So that's a property, very, very hard. Gray iron is gray, grainy when it's broken. Things like it's easy fluidity. This is a gray iron casting. And you can see the intricacy here, how there's a lot of detail. Now I got this part because it was scrap. It didn't quite make the cut. Like, it didn't fill in all these parts. So they were going to just melt it down, or to re-melt it and re-pour it. I said, oh, that's kind of cool. Can I keep it? And so I kept it, and it's been a great presentation, a part of this presentation for a while. Okay? Anybody know what this is? You probably haven't used this. I remember this as a kid. This goes to an old-fashioned barber chair, where this was the footrest of the barber chair, and there'd be holes drilled right here, and there's a pivot, and then this would flip down. There's another hinge here, so you could have a taller person sitting there, but like a kid would put his feet here, and then this would flip up. But this is gray, so very fluid, moldable, very easily moldable, and it's a gray, grainy appearance when broken. And it's inexpensive. So things like fire hydrants, it will rust. I want to put that down too. It will rust, so they have to be painted if they're outdoors, like that fire hydrant there. Wrought iron is ferrous, and it's the closest thing to being pure iron, but it's still an alloy. All these other ones are alloys also. If this said simply iron on there, it would be an element. But these wrought iron still contains a little bit of other stuff, and It's really cheap, easy to bend, easy to work with. You can weld it, and it looks kind of like good for making gating and decorative things like this. So very inexpensive, but still very strong. Like that fence, you can break through that if you were trying to, but it's cheap and easy to use. All right, steel. Bum, 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 bum. Steel made American. Right? Steel is different than iron. We'll look at different types of steel. All steel is ferrous. It has an iron base. The majority of it is iron. Anybody know who that is? Yeah, Frodo. And you know the name of that sword? Sting. Sting. That's right. Good job. I'm a Lord of the Rings fan. And so in the movie, the elves were master craftsmen, and they were incredible metallurgists, and they made this sword that is so powerful, has some unique properties. They mixed all these elements together that when orcs would come around, the sting would glow blue, and you know that orcs were around. Our metallurgists today are still working on that, but haven't quite got those recipes down. That was funny. How about this one? Everybody know the story of that? It's a movie. Extremely gory. If you don't like gore, don't watch it. But Uma Thurman there seeks revenge on Bill, and the name of the title says it all. She goes out to take care of business, and she goes to Japan and talks to Hattori Hanzo, who's a master samurai sword maker. And Hattori Hanzo won't make her a sword because she hasn't proven herself, and she goes through all this hard labor and proves herself finally, and he gives her this sword, and then she goes and seeks revenge. Yes, both of these are based on truth, though. And these are both fiction, but both of them are based on truth, that the right steel is incredible. Mixing the right ingredients together, doing the whole process of making that steel can make steel that cuts through other steel. And we have steel that cuts through steel. Okay. Hundreds of different types of steel for all different things. It's all iron, melting point, between about 0.05 and 0.2 or 2% carbon. So we're going to look at that here. Low carbon steel. It's on there. Low carbon steel, also known as mild steel. We're going to use a lot of mild steel in this class. Mild steel is cheap. I get a whole bunch of it for free. Things like there's tubing, square tubing, round tubing, flat stock. This is all mild steel. Sheet metal that you're going to be using is mild steel. These filing cabinets, this is mild steel. It's inexpensive, it's cheap, it welds. As what you're going to be looking for on the quiz, between 0.1 and 0.3% carbon. So it's called low carbon steel. The technique, I'm not going to go too much into it, but they'll take iron or like melt down your old car, say, and put it in a furnace and burn out all the carbon and all the other elements, get pure iron, and then add precise amounts of carbon back into it. And the carbon has a lot of incredible properties for it. Okay. Medium carbon steel would be like tools, okay? Things like pliers or hammers. It's more expensive than low carbon steel, but it's stronger and tougher and has its place to make things that are very useful. Okay. Even nails might be medium carbon steel because they're You have to pound them, and you don't want them to bend. Like low carbon steel might bend a little more. Okay. And then high carbon steel, it's between 0.6 and 0.2% carbon. It's heat treated, which I'm going to demonstrate some heat treating for you in a minute. We can make tools that cut through other metal with high carbon steel. Okay. So there's a quick comparison. Just the difference looks very slight. It's not much difference, up to 2%, right? But that's a big difference in terms of how the metal responds. It's like putting too much salt in your cookies. Oh, that's not very good. Yeah, but you get the right amount of salt, it's delicious. Okay, here's two of them that are on there. We have hot rolled and cold rolled steel. Hot rolled is this, and this is cold rolled. What's the first noticeable difference? See, shinier. Right? The cold rolled is shiny. The hot rolled is kind of scaly. Sometimes it's actually a lot more scaly than this. It's kind of been handled. But if you get it fresh out of the hot rolling process, it looks more scaly. So these are the same ingredients, the exact same ingredients. One, they shape it when it's hot, like glowing red hot. And it goes through, it's called a die, and they shape it this size, and it comes out and it's glowing red hot, and then slowly cools down. But what's happening there is all these molecules are like, woo, they're dancing around, it's hot, everything's feeling great, and they're moving around, and as it is slowly cooled down, the party comes to an end, they're all just chilling, and they found their spot. Everybody's like, nice shoulder room, you got a lot of room to move around, right? Makes it more flexible, makes it easier to machine, gives it that gray color. It's not perfect. The corners are a little bit rounded over. Cold rolled, on the other hand, they push this through these big, huge dies and squeeze it together and change the shape of it without heating. Pushes everybody, all those molecules really tight together, and they're like just bound in there. Keeps that corner sharp, keeps that shiny surface. It's harder, it bends, it's harder to bend, but it comes out with a nicer quality. Right? So it depends on what you're doing, what you want. But it's the same ingredients. This is what's called work hardening. I need to grab a piece of metal, I'll be right there. I didn't need to grab one this long, but here it is. And this is hot rolled steel. It's a little gray, has a little bit of flakiness on it. It's grayer. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate what work hardening is. And this could be a lot shorter, but I'm sort of cutting it. Also, I want to state, I'm going to bend this metal. I'm not trying to prove my strength or anything. This isn't giving you free right to just go pick up pieces of metal and bend them. Because we like to have our metal straight. It's nice to have it straight to build things. And when there's a nice clean piece of metal and somebody has bent it up in a vise or pounded on it, it's much less usable. Unless that's the purpose of trying to do that. But watch what happens here. I'm just going to kind of pick a spot out here. I'm going to bend it. Okay. So what I just did by bending it is I work hardened this. This pushed all those molecules together, more like cold roll than hot roll. Okay. Now I'm going to try to bend it back. Again, get a little shorter piece here and try to bend it back. It didn't even bend there. It bent here and here, see? So this part, because I bent it once, is harder than the rest of the metal. I work harder. So that's true with like hammering. You can hammer metal and work harden it. Forging, that's one of the processes in forging where you want to make the metal harder. So you simply by hammering it and pounding those molecules closer together, you make it harder. Okay. So that's the difference between hot rolled and cold rolled. Same ingredients, same mixture. So high-speed steel. We have cutters. We have one right there. Here. Here's a drill bit. This is for drilling holes, and it can drill in metal. And it says right on here, HSS, high-speed steel. Now, what high-speed steel does, it resists wearing out at high temperatures. So if I start drilling a hole in metal, or cutting with an end mill, another cutting tool, and that metal is going to get hot because it's metal against metal, there's friction. But we want the high-speed steel to stay sharp longer, so that edge will stay sharp during heat, even though it gets hotter. Metal's very susceptible to heat. It changes shape, it changes sizes. So, but high-speed steel is very resistant for that. And it'll keep that sharp little microscopic edge that's really sharp. Spring steel. So spring steel is cool. Here's a spring. The spring here. Bling, bling, bling. This will take over, I've seen tests of 1 million compressions. So spring, and some springs will do tens of millions of compressions. Okay? But why is this different than this? How come I could bend this and this comes back? One part of the answer is the ingredients are a little different. They have a few different elements in there. Something, I'm not sure all the ingredients in most spring steel, but right, maybe more silicon, maybe aluminum, different elements. So the ingredients are a little different, but they also heat treat this. So once they have it shaped and formed, they put it into an oven and heat it up to a certain temperature and then cool it down at a certain speed. It may cool down really fast, it may cool down really slow. They'll even freeze it. They'll even do the cryogenic, where they'll take it down to negative 200 degrees and warm it up slowly. And that changes the properties of the metal. Okay? We've all seen these little clamps before, right? These little paper clips. Right? So the handle here, I guess that's probably medium carbon steel because it has to stay strong and it's chrome plated or zinc plated. But the black part of this clip is spring steel. And this works over and over and over and over, like 1,000 times. Okay, what happens if I take my paint torch? There's a little bit of black coating on here, which creates a little bit of fumes. So don't breathe for the next minute or two. That's right enough. Let that cool down to room temperature. It won't take too long to just breathe in. I could dip it in water, but that's going to cool it faster and might actually re-change. So in here, right now, all those molecules I just kind of freed up. Same ingredients, those molecules are bouncing around. Hey, before you guys like froze me into this position where I had to keep springing back. And now the party's kind of getting going and we're all dancing around in there. bit longer. And what do you think's going to happen? No spring in this. I just took the spring out simply by a heat treatment. Right? That was something close to what's called normalizing, where you let those molecules go back. Okay, but by the heat treating process to make them springs, they kind of lock them into configuration where they're all tight and locked in there. So very interesting ways by simply the temperature change gives different properties to steel. Having the same ingredients. Stainless steel. There's a difference between stainless and zinc plate. This, as I mentioned before, is stainless. Okay. You can go to the hardware store and buy a bolt. I don't have two exact identical bolts, but we'll just use this as an example. I go to the hardware store and buy this bolt, and I have two choices. One is stainless steel, and one is zinc coated. And it would be a good hard steel underneath it. The stainless steel is going to cost, I just have to guess, could be even $1.50 for this bolt, where the zinc coated one might be 45 cents. So stainless is stainless all the way through. The zinc coating is something we'll talk about, but that protects it from rusting. So if we had like a fence gate, this gate's going to open and close and kind of make wear on the part, and it's zinc coating, you're going to wear off that zinc coating eventually, then it's going to rust, and then your gate's going to seize up. Where you spend a little extra money on the stainless steel bolt, it's stainless all the way through, and it won't rust. It's resistant to corrosion resistant. Stainless steel is less magnetic, sometimes not magnetic at all, depends on how much chromium is in there. The chromium I'd write down also. Chromium is something like 22% of stainless steel is chromium. So it's still steel, it's still ferrous, but it has a lot of chromium. I have a magnet right here. So irons are magnetic. Stainless steel, though it is iron-based and ferrous, is not magnetic. And you may have a refrigerator at home with a stainless steel front that magnets won't stick to. We bought one 5 years ago, and the side, we not only put magnets on the side, but on the front, it's stainless steel, and magnets don't stick to. Corrosion resistant chromium. These are standards for our American steel workers. So in the automotive, SAE, Society of Automotive Engineers, they have a standard. What this is telling people how much carbon is in the steel. What's the type of steel? How good a quality is it? So I like to say in China, they don't have these standards. That's why if you buy a Chinese product, anybody know Harbor Freight? What's Harbor Freight known for? Tools. Nobody's been in Harbor Freight store before? It's tools, and inexpensive tools. And I bought new tools from there because I need something quick or it's a good deal. And it may last for 5 years. Oh, that's a pretty good tool. Finally dies, I go back, get another one, and it lasts for 2 days. So because they don't have these standards, you don't know what you're getting. Now China is definitely getting better at making good quality products, something that we as Americans need to be wary of, and some of you hopefully will go into that manufacturing field or engineering field and help our economy because of this. big picture talking here, but, all right, copper and bronze. And brass. Copper is kind of reddish based. It's superconductive, very conductive, so reddish in color. It was used a lot for plumbing. This is a plumbing, part of a water moving system. It's also an electrical wire. It's become very expensive. So we've had, there's been a lot of cases where houses are being built and the plumber comes in and puts in the copper, the electrician comes in and puts in the wire. The next day they come back and all that copper and the wire has been stolen out of the house because it has a high recycle value. I hate thieves, never steal. There was a case down in Denver just recently, a monument was vandalized and they realized that it wasn't really vandalized other than the purpose to take the bronze plaque off the front and try to sell it for scrap. So very expensive. Yes? Non-ferrous. Copper is an element. It's on the periodic table. It's non-ferrous. It is only copper. Comes out those tools I showed you at the beginning were copper. It comes out of the ground and it's relatively useful right out of the ground. Okay. And pretty and easy to work, easy to bend, great for art. Next is bronze. Bronze is an alloy, and it's a mixture between tin and copper. This is bronze. And the yellowish or golden color. There's a little mass to that. Right. Feel that? Ready for the rest of you? Here's some mass. I'll give a stick. Perfect opportunity. Yeah. Copper and tin makes bronze. Bronze is highly used in sculptures. We've been using it for a long time. In fact, there's a whole age, the Bronze Age. When we figured out how to, it's much harder and much more useful in some ways than just copper. Yeah. So the Bronze Age came up with bronze, this mixture of tin and copper, and has more qualities. All these sculptures that you see around Fort Collins and Loveland, we have multiple sculpture foundries in Loveland, too, and they're worldwide. They make stuff all around the world, right here in Loveland. If you've ever been to Benson's Sculpture Garden in Loveland, anybody? Yeah, really cool. I love it. It's something I want to explore someday, making bronze sculptures. But the process is really fascinating, but it's very fluid. So you really start with clay on a lot of those, right? And then they make a clay sculpture. And bronze is so, it keeps the details so you can actually see the artist's fingerprints in the sculptures after it goes through multiple processes to make. So on clay, they put a rubber casting on it. And in that rubber casting, they put wax. And they take that wax and dip that wax into a slurry. And then they melt the wax out. And they pour bronze into that. So through all those steps, we can still see the fingerprints of the artist. So very detailed. And brass has its own musical category. Anybody in a band or a choir or orchestra? Others. What are the different ones? We have strings, we have woodwind, we have brass, percussion. Yep. So actually right here I have, here it is. A student came in and his Zildjian cymbal. Zildjian is a very popular, I just remember knowing this because a friend of mine was a drummer. It actually says Zildjian right on here. And made in India. And it is India. Cambodia. Anyway, this was part of a symbol, and there was a crack in his symbol. Somehow it cracked. The manufacturing process wasn't perfect. It cracked, and it thunk, 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 and we tried to braze it. We brought it in, we tried to weld it together. I didn't have good expertise with welding brass, but we just cut this piece off. We were able to do that. And then ting, 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 they got rid of that crack and it worked for him. So, but brass is a mixture between zinc and copper and has its own place in the world. Lots of musical instruments are made of brass. So copper plus tin equals bronze, copper plus zinc equals brass. Zinc and tin by themselves are elements. They're on the periodic table. As I mentioned already, zinc is used for corrosion resistance. We're going to be using sheet metal here probably tomorrow. And we use a zinc-coated sheet metal. This helps prevent it from rusting. Same with the screw. It's a zinc-coated screw. Corrosion resistant. Not food safe. So even though it doesn't rust, it's not food quality. You can't use zinc-coated pots or pans in a restaurant or in a kitchen. And then tin is a soft, shiny metal used to coat containers. We used to have tin cans. Now we have aluminum. Both of those are elements. Pewter is interesting. Pewter is a mixture between copper, tin, and alloy, but it doesn't have the red color. Antimony. My brother's done painting alloys. Here I'm going to pass this around. One cool thing about pewter is, you tell me if I'm right, just feel it with your fingers. You don't even have to like dig into it or cut into it. It feels soft. You can just feel that it's soft. See what I'm talking about? Like, why does it, even though you can't bend it or dent it, and you could probably take it with a pencil or something and jab it, but it just has this soft feel to it. Metals are interesting, weird topics. Yeah. Center right there, that's right across the hall. There used to be a sculpture foundry up in Estes Park that made pewter sculptures. This one is a great story here. So titanium is an element right out of the ground. Bam. Incredibly useful. The strength of steel and the weight of aluminum. It's expensive. It's used in high-end racing parts, aircraft. You know, I have friends who are bike racers, and they'll spend a lot of money just to shed an ounce or two from their bike components. So they buy titanium bike components. Parts on race cars, like Formula One cars, lots of titanium because it's light and so it's strong. Okay. Great story. Does anybody know what that? Well, you do now if you've been the SR-71 Blackbird. What's so special about that plane? Anybody know? Yeah. I think it's officially, maybe unofficially, the fastest plane we've ever created. And maybe there's some we don't know about that they don't tell us about. But you can just look at the front end of it. It is sleek. It has engine, gas tank, and cockpit. And the top view is wing. And this plane was designed to spy on Russia in the Cold War. It's a super high altitude spy plane that goes 3 or 4 some reports 4.5 times the speed of sound. New York to LA in like 2 hours. Like, fast. Most of the world's titanium comes from Russia. So we were getting Russian titanium, bringing it here, building a spy plane, and then going to spy plane. But titanium strong, can withstand those forces. Aluminum, right out of the ground, is not very useful. In fact, it took years and years of scientific laboratory type chemistry to figure out how to make the aluminum soil, the alumina coming out of the ground, into a useful product. Most places on the earth you can scoop up dirt and there's a lot of alumina. Right on the periodic table. But to turn that into something useful is hard. So there's a company called Alcoa, Aluminum Company of America, Alcoa. And they figured out the process to make it cheap. So 80% of the world's aluminum comes from Alcoa because they came up with this process. Back in the 1850s, this aluminum was so rare that, and so expensive because it had to be done under certain circumstances, that the Washington Monument, when they built that in 1857, I believe, there's some drawings, they put that little pyramid on the top with the most expensive metal they could find because it was really special. Today it's the same metal that we drink our soda can out of, and it's like, what's closer, the garbage or the recycle bin? So 150 years ago, it was the most expensive metal, one of the most expensive metals on the planet. Today it's almost disposable. Don't throw it away, because all metals are recyclable. And that's one of the great things about aluminum, is I've started witnessing it, is it's very recyclable. Plastics aren't. Plastics, sometimes you can get 1 or 2 at the most generations, but aluminum you can get hundreds and if not thousands of generations. So a lot of these places that serve soft drinks have aluminum cups now. They're really cold because they're really conductive, but they also are very recyclable. Tungsten. So there's 2 things here. Tungsten is an element. It's on the periodic table. Tungsten carbide is a man-made alloy that is almost as hard as diamonds. It's the hardest man-made material we have. Tungsten and tungsten carbide. Tungsten extremely heat resistant. It melts at around 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm not sure. It's something 4,900, 5,000 degrees. Tungsten carbide is the tips of a lot of cutting tools. So before we saw high-speed steel, well, here is a cutting tool that has a tungsten carbide tip. So this is medium carbon steel, shock resistant, won't break if you drop it, really tough. Tungsten carbide is super hard. So just this little shiny piece is tungsten carbide that has been raised or soldered onto this. So this is a very sharp, hard cutter. It'll keep its edge very long. Hardest man-made material. Again, hardness and toughness are different. Hardness is usually right in the grill. Will break easily. Another cool, interesting fact about tungsten is we don't have these very much anymore, but the old incandescent light bulb. On the light bulb, you have current that goes in here, and they meet here. Positive and negative, meet right here. That little thin hair thickness piece of tungsten gets so hot that it glows, and that's what lights up the room. But it gets so hot that any other material, it would just burn out immediately. But because it's tungsten and it gets up to, I don't know what a light bulb is, but say easily 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, but it doesn't really melt until 5,000, it lights up. Now those old light bulbs were really hot. If you touch one or you turn off the light and you went to unscrew it, it would stay hot a long time, burn your fingers. People have told me, and this doesn't make sense to me because I'm not that smart of a person compared to some of these scientists, but they're more efficient at producing heat than they are light. So those are two different things. So it's like apples and oranges. But even though they produce a lot of light, they're better at producing heat. It's because all it is this little strip of tungsten that is just getting thousands of degrees but not burning out. And eventually, everything wears out eventually. So they burn out after 1,000 hours. Okay, these last few, I'm not going to go over. They're all things we mix with steel to make steel better. Okay, so you can write those down. Molybdenum, I'll just point out, there's a molybdenum mine up near Leadville, between Copper Mountain and Leadville. And that is still active. I just talked to somebody that works there. There's like 300 employees working there.